Hey everybody, thanks for joining us. It is a special edition of our show today. We are joined by Ashley Smith, CEO of Smith-Midland Corporation. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Sure thing. You're one of the more interesting companies I follow. One, because you're kind of for a publicly traded company, you're on the smaller end and less followed, I think is fair to say.
Right.
So first, we'll start with an easy one. So for those who aren't familiar with Smith-Midland, can you start by just kind of giving a high-level overview of the company's history and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. So our company was started by my grandfather in 1960. So I'm the third generation family member since then to run the company. My grandfather, and then my father, and now me. So we started in 1960. The first product that we made was a precast concrete cattle guard. So it would go in a driveway. The cows don't walk across it, and cars can drive over it. You don't need a gate. So my granddad started, he was always an inventor, tinkerer. He started with that. My dad came in right after that in 1960. So from there, we started developing other precast concrete products. So precast concrete just simply means it's made, concrete products made in a factory and stored on a yard at the factory until they're needed on the job site. So we started on the farm, we've moved to our current location, and then we have other plants, one in North Carolina, one in South Carolina. Our main headquarters plant is in Virginia. So we manufacture concrete products, we manufacture high-end Class A architectural panels that would be used for the outside of high-rise buildings. We also produce concrete barriers, safety barriers that go along the highway, and then noise barriers. We make underground electrical boxes that are used in data centers, and so also custom precast concrete. So we have a lot of custom work that we do, but we have branded products that were developed by us. They're proprietary to us, and some of those products are the number one products in their category. So for instance, the J.J. Hooks highway barrier is the number one highway barrier across the United States. So we don't make it on the East Coast and ship it. We use licensees, and that's the second part of our business is licensing the technology. And then the third part of the business is we rent the safety barrier, and we've been renting that since the early or late 70s. A couple of other products that we make that are proprietary to us, besides J.J. Hooks, are the Slender Wall architectural cladding system, our soft sound absorptive highway Soundwall barrier, and then our Easy Set building. So we have the manufacturing division. We develop products that are good enough that other producers of precast products around North America and across the world pay us a royalty because they'd like to add those products to what they make. And then the barrier rental business, which is mainly focused from Delaware to Virginia.
So it's fair to say that a lot of people listening have probably seen one of your products, even if they didn't know it was made by you.
Right.
So I'm going to go off script for a second here, but talk about the J.J. Hooks for a second. I know you license it, which is a big part of the business. I think in 2025, if I'm not mistaken, that was actually the fastest growing part of the business.
Right.
What makes the J.J. Hook specifically different than any other highway barrier you might see?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the main thing is with the J.J. Hook is there's no what we call loose hardware. So most of the barrier systems that we compete with, or that you might see on the side of the highway, would have loops that stick out of the end of the barrier, and you drop a steel pin down between the loops to connect them. With J.J. Hook, it's very simple. You just have a steel hook that sticks out of the end of one piece of barrier, and then that's the next piece of barrier has a hook, and you just slide them together. So The JJ hook, you don't lose the pins. We've heard stories of when scrap steel was really going for a lot of money. Contractors would come to their job on Monday morning and all the pins would be missing because over the weekend somebody went out and they took all the steel pins out and they sold them. So with JJ hooks, there's no loose hardware to lose, and so that would be the main difference. And again, across the whole United States, the JJ hook barrier connection system is the most popular connection across North America.
So there is a lot going on with construction and highway construction specifically. I think there's a 10-mile stretch of highway right here in Columbia, South Carolina that's been under construction for it seems like 10 years now.
Right.
So you see your barriers all over. I want to get to the rental business in a second because obviously for temporary highway projects, construction workers don't need to buy those.
Right.
But so one thing that kind of stood out to me about a year ago, you referred to this as the company's strongest inflection point in its history.
Right.
So is that because of all the infrastructure investment we're seeing or for some other reasons? Can you give a little color behind that? And do you still feel that way?
Right. Yeah, great question. Yes, it is. You're exactly right. A big part of it is the historic investment in infrastructure across the U.S. And even with all of the investment that's has been made, our infrastructure is lagging way behind where it should be. I think one of the engineering groups gives our infrastructure a D grade. So we really need to invest a lot more in infrastructure. But that is a big part of it. And then also there's a switch to on the highway barrier side. About every 10 years, the Federal Highway Administration comes out with a new crash test requirement because the type of vehicle on the side of the road changes. So I think today a lot of big pickup trucks and big SUVs going up and down the highway. So any roadside safety feature like guardrail, signpost, concrete barrier has to get tested to a higher requirement. So that requirement was actually put in place and started in 2020. However, most states across the country gave a grandfather time period where the old concrete barrier could be used and you didn't have to switch, or they gave you some time. So it's kind of state by state, but for example, in the state of Virginia, by the year 2030, none of the old style barrier can be used. Everything has to be the new style of MASH TL3 barrier. And even in Virginia, if a contractor is starting a project today, it won't be finished until 2030. The state says you have to have the new style now. So that's happening state by state across the country. Another example is the state of California. By the end of 26, that's their deadline, and anything going forward has to be a new MASH barrier. So I think we're right now probably only in the second inning of the demand for all that concrete barrier. The way I talk about it is all the concrete barrier that you see out on the highway, 95% of it has to be replaced in the next few years. And so that was a big driver of our licensing division last year, and we expect to see that, for the next 4 or 5 years. And some people would say, well, then what happens next? So we're on all the committees where they're talking about what is next. So there's always, and we do more testing and more new product development than any precast company in North America. So we're always looking and paying attention to what's next. Another driver for the business are data centers. That construction, we're in Virginia, which has the most data centers of any state in the country. And we've been making underground utility vaults that are used when you're bringing the electric cable onto a data center communication. So we've been making those since the late 60s. also are for off-site panelization. The number one problem in the construction industry today, in commercial construction, is the lack of workers. There's not enough workers to build what we need. That's why housing is that's not in a slump, but they don't have enough workers to build the housing to fill the demand. So owners and contractors for commercial projects really in the last few years have started to look and say, how can we get these made off-site? How can we get parts of the building prefabricated and brought in? So precast concrete means it's made off-site and then we bring it in. So, all these things, and then also all of our intellectual property, all the testing, all the patents that we have, all these things that we've been putting in place, over the decades. Right now, all these tailwinds are coming in seemingly at the same time to really drive the growth of the company over the past 5 years and even into the future.
So, real quick on the requirement to replace 95% of the highway barriers by 2030. Are you? You said we're in like the second inning. Are you seeing this as more of a gradual thing between now and 2030, or is 2029 going to be just an exceptionally good year where everybody's striving to replace them all at once?
Right. So I think it's gonna. It's already starting to, to go up. I think the closer we get, everybody kind of waits till the last minute, right? But the first thing that contractors have been doing is buying used barrier. But at some point, you don't want to buy used barrier that you can't use in a year or two. So the closer we get to these state deadlines, I think it's already starting to grow, but it'll get even accelerated the next few years.
So I want to dig into the rental business that you've mentioned. Mm-hmm. That's the JJ Hooks is primarily a rental business, if I'm not mistaken. That's where that comes in. That's one of the higher margin parts of your business. It's an interesting business to me, especially because you've said you want to, I think, more than double the rental fleet over the next few years. Right. So, right. Is that going to be, all East Coast built in house, or does that include licensing and products that are built elsewhere? And what are the practical constraints to scaling that business faster? Because that seems like an excellent revenue driver for you.
Sure. So we've been running concrete barriers since the late 70s. And up until maybe 5-6 years ago, the most barrier we had in our inventory was maybe 75,000 linear feet or 100,000 feet. And so if a contractor had a large project like 50,000 feet, we couldn't, we weren't in the position to help them out. So we would sell the barrier to them. So that kind of kept our rental business small. So we were probably, we didn't have a lot of cash in the past to invest in that. Maybe we're a little too conservative. And a few years ago, we just said, well, we've seen this model work in other markets, so let's go ahead and get more aggressive. So we got up to about 250,000 feet of barrier, I think about 5 years ago. And then about 4 years ago, we doubled from 250 to over 500,000 feet of rental barrier inventory. And the way we did that was we had made a lot of barrier for a project in Northern Virginia, but when we signed the contract, we said at the end of the project we'll buy the barrier back. This was a public-private partnership, and at the end of that that construction job, all the assets were sold, and that was the end of it. So we bought all that barrier back at a much less cost than it would be for us to make it. So we were at 80, before that, we bought that, we were at 80, 90% utilization. We bought that and we dropped back down to 40% utilization. So over the past 3 years, we've been renting all of that barrier. So right now we're back up to 80 or 90% utilization. So we've been actually making at our, that's the nice thing about what we do. Our precast shop can make the barrier that we transfer over to the division that rents it out. So, we're making it for ourselves, which saves some money. So for the past year, we've been making barrier, about 40 pieces of barrier a day to go into that rental fleet. And so right now, I think we're up to probably close to 800,000 feet of barrier. But if the market needs 1 million feet of barrier, to get all the construction done, and there's a demand for rental, we're going to continue making barrier for that. But to get to your point about constraints, we've added some new equipment. We've added new operators. We put new crews together because we have to be able to service all of our customers when they need the barrier delivered, when they need it taken off the job site at the end of the day. And we do have customers that still want to own barrier, so we make barrier for customers. We make more money selling it at one time. It's a pretty nice, deal. But over the long term, that recurring revenue stream is what we like. Another thing we like about the rental business is all of the money, we get that up front. So for example, if it's a 5-year project or 4-year project, all of the money for the complete rental term, the freight to and from the job, all that money is brought in up front. So, we get to use that. I kind of call us the Warren Buffett of the precast industry. He takes his, the money he gets from his insurance companies and reinvests that. So we kind of do that with our the money we get up front. We reinvest it back into more barrier, and so that's kind of that side of the business. We like it. We like having the product out on the job site, knowing that month after month that it sits there, it's generating income for the company.
So, this is my ignorance about the concrete industry. How long do one of the barriers last? Because that's a big part of the rental business as well. Because
Sure.
you make one, it rents for say like a 4-year contract, like you just mentioned, and then you can re-rent it to someone else. How long can that go on? Do these have a useful lifespan?
Right, yeah, that's a great question. So for us, I would say if our crews are handling the barrier, probably 20 years. If I've seen some barrier out there that a contractor has, and maybe they don't take as good a care of it as we do. And then also at the end of the project, we bring the barrier back and we refurbish it, we paint it, and make it look like new again. So the barrier that you rent from us is going to look a lot better than what you see maybe that a contractor has, and they're not, refurbishing the barrier in between. They're definitely not painting it. So if you're traveling anywhere up and down, from Delaware to Virginia, and you see some barrier on the side of the highway that's painted and it looks nice, it's probably our rental barrier.
Okay. So I want to kind of pivot to the licensing business. I know you have 3 revenue streams. You sell products, which the economics of that are, fairly straightforward compared to the other 2. So the licensing, because if somebody needs, say, 100,000 feet of barrier in Oregon, you're not going to make that in Virginia and truck it over. That's going to be a licensing deal.
That's right.
So in 2025, licensing, I did the math. It was a little under 5% of your total sales. But I have to imagine, one, that it's a very high margin part of your sales.
That's right.
So you have right now the latest numbers I saw, about 75 licensing agreements in the U.S. and in some other countries. And so what's the ceiling on that? And how do you think of the licensing business in terms of like the long-term outlook of the business?
Sure. Well, I'll start kind of in the beginning, and the way we got into it back in the late 60s, early 70s. My dad and granddad were making their cattle guards in Virginia, and they were shipping them up to New York Then they were shipping them to Florida from Virginia. And so there was a guy in Georgia who heard about all these cattle guards coming from Virginia down into Georgia and Florida. So he called up my dad and he said, hey, why don't you let me make these cattle guards down here in Georgia? And so my dad and this guy went into partnership, but then they licensed the technology. So that kind of started it. So it's grown from there. And I would say probably the biggest product, the product that has the most potential in the licensing is our slender wall product. The JJ Hooks has really driven the growth the last few years because of this changeover to the MASH TL3. But for our licensees, it was a real easy transition because we have like 45 JJ Hooks producers around the country and overseas. They were making the old style barrier. We did all of the testing. And so when you go out and do a test for one of these crash tests for a barrier, the R&D and everything around it, each test runs about $250,000. So most precasters, they don't have the time, or maybe they haven't done that before, not sure how to do that. We've done multiple cycles of this. So, and then those costs get spread, across all of the licensees. And when they switched from the old style to the new TL3, all they had to do was just make a small modification on the end of their forms that they already owned, and we were in business right away with the new style. So that, and then we've been able to add new licensees in parts of the country where we didn't have barrier producers before, and there's a few other parts of the country where we don't have licensees yet, so we're kind of attacking those. Just one story about licensing in California. JJ Hooks, we've been trying to get approved in California for JJ Hooks for like 30 years and never did. And so when the TL3 crash test requirements came around, we already had the test, we had all the package, we had the federal approval, and California Highway Department had not developed a crash tested product. So we came in with this whole package with the silver bow around it. We said, here's the package that you need. So finally, after 30 years, now once we gave them the package, it still took 2 years of going through the process, but finally we've got approval. And so we've been approved in California for about 5 years now. Not a lot has happened until California put this mandate that said, all right, this is the sunset date. So we've been working with one of the biggest precast producers out west. They have 2 plants in California, one in Southern California, one in Northern California, making JJ Hooks, and both those plants and all their forms are full, so they're going full out. So, we just see a lot of upside, obviously, on that part of the business right now.
Okay, so let's talk about the kind of business strategy, capital allocation, because you mentioned you're the Warren Buffett of barrier rentals.
Yeah.
So, and I have to imagine, because you are, as you mentioned, the 3rd generation of your family leading this company. So, one, was it you who made the decision to go public, or was that one of the predecessors?
Yeah, that was my father. We went public back in 1996, and so we meet with investors all the time, and every now and then they'll say, well, why are you public? And back then, the reason we became public is my dad was signed personally on all the banknotes. And this was back in a time period where there was a lot of buying and selling of banks, a lot of consolidation. So we had a series of banks who merged or bought the bank we were working with, and they said, well, we don't do your kind of business. So Dad would have to go out and and find a new bank. So he kind of got tired of doing that. He didn't like having his name on, signed on all the notes. So he met somebody that had contacts on Wall Street. So we went public. I don't think a deal like that small, just on one small business like that would ever happen again. But yeah, so that's kind of how we became public. And then a few years ago, we just we said, hey, how can we create more value? How can we grow, create more value, get the stock price up? And so we've really focused on that the last 5 years. So one thing you asked about capital allocation, probably 10 or 12 years ago, we used to pay for, 3 or 4 years in a row, a small special dividend. We quit doing that, and we just invested back into the company. And the way we look at it, we probably, since I am third generation, I'm not focused. Just of course we're focused on the quarter. We're a public company. We're aware of that, but we don't manage just for the quarter. We look out further. What are investments that we can put in place now that are going to have a positive effect in the future? So we have a longer term kind of view. We look at that more on a longer term basis, and we have investors that appreciate that and like the fact that we're taking a longer view. But just a couple of the things I'm going to read. So over the past 5 years, this was between December 31st, 2020 and December 31st of 2025. So annual revenue grew from $44 million to over $93 million. And over the past 5 years, we've been invested heavily back into the business. That's where that's where our profits have gone. So our notes payable have actually dropped. From 5 years ago, we were a little over 4 million. Now we're a little under 4 million. So earnings per share back then were 51 cents. Last year, December, full year was $2.36. Total assets went from a little over 46 million to almost 88 million. And then the share price went from $9.45 to $36.34. So, we're very proud of that track record. That was a five-year strategic plan that just finished up at the end of 2025. We have a new one in place going forward. So all these, we talk about all these tailwinds. There's always the unknown. Over the past 5 years, if somebody had said, oh, hey, you guys are going to have to deal with COVID, and you guys are going to have to deal with 40% inflation, we would have said, how can you run a business? So even through all those headwinds, and it wasn't easy making this, but we're very proud of what we've done. So looking forward, I don't see anything. There's nothing that I know of that would keep us from continuing on that same track.
So you just mentioned you have a new 5-year plan in place. So without going into too many of the details of it, what do you see as the biggest opportunities in that next 5-year period, if you had to name one or two out of everything that you do?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So, people say, well, what would you focus on? If you look across the past 5 years, all three parts of the business have grown, and we've invested back in. So we're going to continue to do that, continue to grow those parts of the business. We're very optimistic across all three parts of that business. If somebody out there wants to come and give us a big pot of money and say, hey, I want you to take, a part of your business and grow it, we probably would look at the rental business, because right now in the barrier rental business, it's very fragmented across the United States. A lot of smaller companies So these companies, they have the same challenge. A lot of the barrier, most of the barrier that they have is the old style barrier. So they might have invested $5 million or $10 million in their rental fleet that's going to be obsolete. So are they going to want to make that same investment going forward? So I would probably look at that if somebody wanted to come in and say, hey, just because of the opportunity with the transition to the new TL3 barrier, kind of presents a good opportunity right now in that particular line of business.
So the rental business, it's practically limited by where your facilities are located, right? All three of your plants are located within the same tri-state area, essentially.
Right.
Can you kind of give us kind of the timeline of, you started in Virginia, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then you expanded to the Carolinas. Do you see further geographic expansion, or do you see it more as a more of a licensing expansion over the next, say, 5, 10, whatever number of years?
Probably focus more on the licensing. Now, we have looked at some acquisitions of precast businesses and passed on a few of them for whatever reason. We still believe, and at the 3 plants that we have each plant has more room, more physical land attached to it, so we could realistically double that part of the business without having to go buy more property. Now we'd have to invest more in some maybe plants, but a couple of years ago we just doubled the size of our plant in it was a new plant 6 years ago in North Carolina. We just doubled the size of it. Last year we got some new forms for some bridge products. We have 40 acres in South Carolina. A few years ago, our plant in Virginia, we bought 30 acres next door. Actually, before I got on with you, I was meeting with the county about a site plan to develop some of that. It's a soybean field beside us, to develop that for more storage and maybe a future expansion. So we have plenty of growth with the property that we already have. So it would be building out the licensing division, introducing more proprietary products, getting more patents, crash tests, and then also just whatever the market is going to end up in our area for barrier rental. And when I say the rental, so the rental is, we don't do that in North Carolina and South Carolina. We stick with Delaware, Southern Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, and D.C. for the rental. But there's still, that's a big market. There's a lot of highway construction in that part of the world. So the next 5 years, there's still a lot of room, a lot of runway for us to grow.
Okay. Almost at the end. I just have a couple more questions for you. I appreciate you sticking with us.
Sure.
So, like you mentioned, you're 3rd generation. At the Motley Fool, we tend to gravitate toward founder-led businesses.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that wouldn't be practical in your case. It was founded a long time ago. But
Right.
3rd generation leadership's about the closest thing you can get to a founder-led
Right.
business that's been established for 65 years. I think it was 66 years.
Right. Right.
So how do you think? And answer this however you want. How does the fact that you are a 3rd generation owner of the business, essentially, how does that shape your decisions differently than, say, if your family had decided to hire a CEO 20 years ago? Like, how is it different with family leadership?
Well, I think the first thing is we take a longer view. Maybe a CEO, if they had a compensation package that was structured a certain way where they would say, well, if I make this investment in a new plant or a new batch plant or new piece of equipment, that's gonna end up being a pay cut for me. We don't think in those terms. We think in terms of, what kind of investment do we need to grow the company? So a lot of my personal little pile of shekels is in company stock. So, I want to create shareholder value. I'm shoulder to shoulder. Our family, is invested. A big part of our family investment is in the company stock. So, we're shoulder to shoulder with the shareholders. So, I want to create more value. I want to see the stock price get the right kind of a treatment and acknowledgement for all of the intellectual property, all of the diversity of product lines, diversity of business, all of these tailwinds that are coming in place right now. So, I think that's the main answer. Just maybe a longer term focus, not just quarter to quarter. Even though, again, we're a public company, so we're looking quarter to quarter, but that doesn't drive our decisions. We're looking further out, longer term.
All right, so I want to give you the last word. Anything we didn't cover that you'd like shareholders to know? Because we have quite a few shareholders among our Motley Fool members in your company.
Okay.
So what would you like them to know that we haven't gone over yet?
Well, you did a good job. I don't know if we didn't. You did a good job asking questions. So I don't know if there's anything in particular. I would, I would just say, the company is different because of the diversity of products, the diversity of business units, and also the intellectual property that we hold. That's a barrier to entry to a lot of people. Now, we also make products that are, not proprietary, so we have a mix in our manufacturing businesses. But again, we have trademarks, trade dress, patents, crash tests. All of these things are kind of a moat that helps gives us an advantage, makes it a little harder for our competitors to follow us. So that's probably the main thing, and then just all these tailwinds. And I feel the same. I think the first question you talked about the inflection point. Do I still feel the same way today? And the answer is yes. I said that a year ago. There's nothing out there that I know of that I see. Now we've got the war going on now, and so we don't know what effect that's going to have on things. But we're in the best position, I believe, in the history of the company.
All right. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot. I know our viewers did too, and we'll have to chat again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Matt. It's good talking to you.